Basically, we're going to talk about how the music industry and privatized prisons, which is a growing industry, have married together. So this is an article. I want you to follow along. Okay, in the 90s, the rap industry swiftly changed from the urban rhythmic battle of rocking the mic. You guys might remember that Sugar Hill Gang. People were just bragging about, who had the finest woman, the nicest car. But now it's changed to a deadly game of disrespect. We see that with Tupac and Biggie Smalls, and the war of words between East and West Coast rap groups, Bloods and Crips, etc. This new gangster rap trend exploded out of nowhere, and soon local wannabe rap groups were transforming themselves into street gangs. So you had, groups that started off as musical groups that later changed into street gangs because of the influence of the music, so taunting and challenging the neighborhood gangs in their territory. I was talking with a man this week whose son was killed after he and his gang made a rap video disrespecting a rival neighborhood gang. He was killed in a drive-by shooting the day after the video was aired on YouTube. Now that's what these gangs are doing. A lot of times, they're getting bold with it. They're actually, putting out what they're going to do, putting out prophecies, if you will, of what they're going to do to other gang, and then they're putting it on YouTube. And then when they get done doing it, they go on YouTube again and glorify it. So since the early 90s, the rap game has taken a very dark and diabolical turn. It changed from the creative battle of rhythmic lyrics and who can get the most ladies to who can sell the most drugs, pimp the most women, and kill the most enemies. Okay, how did this happen? I could sum this up with one verse from the Holy Bible. The love of money is the root of all evil. That's 1 Timothy 6 and 10. America's slave industry has resurrected itself. It's larger, stronger, and more profitable than ever before, and has legally reinvented itself. Okay, we all know it's illegal to capture and enslave the human body. However, the modernized slave owner has learned through new advancements in psychology and technology that if you can capture an individual's mind, the body will follow into its own captivity. I personally coined these modernized slave masters as the private prison cartel. Now, the rap audience has become the modern day plantation for the private prison cartel slave masters who reside on Wall Street. Now, these cartel slave masters don't have to use the big sea ships, rifles, and shackles. They have upgraded from their predecessors to the wireless technology of musical waves. The gangster rappers and entertainers have become the new Uncle Toms, using the tool of music to entrap the minds of the masses, willing to sell their soul for an easy payoff for a nicer house on the plantation. I'm talking about Uncle Toms like the Jay-Z's, the Lil Waynes, the Eminems, and so on. Who are these techno slave owners? Who are these techno slave owners, and what does music have to do with it? Okay, well, it's very finely tuned, covert, intricate system, which has been a dirty little profitable secret of some of Wall Street's elites since the early 90s. These private prison cartel slave owners or handlers are a diabolical syndicate of private prison corporations, pharmaceutical companies, and the entertainment industry. Now, how did all this come to light? Well, the event which blew this conspiracy wide open was an anonymous letter that surfaced on the internet sometime in 2013. This letter was brought to my attention by a Hollywood insider, which prompted me to do a little investigation. Now, not to my surprise, the claims by the author checked out, even according to Wall Street's accounting system. Okay, So I mean, these are public records that shows that that her story was verified, or the story of this individual was verified. The European author claimed to be a former executive of a major record label in the United States. He conveys that he wrote the letter to clear his conscience after seeing the devastation the rap industry was having on the youth in America. This letter was regarding a secret industry meeting held back in 1991 on the topic of taking rap music in a new direction. The following is the anonymous letter. So, like I said, and this was a secret meeting. So I'm going to read this. The letter's kind of long, but just listen closely. Okay. After more than 20 years, I finally decided to tell the world what I witnessed in 1991, which I believe was one of the biggest turning points in popular music and ultimately American society. I have struggled for a long time weighing the pros and cons of making the story public, as I was reluctant to implicate the individuals who were present that day. So I've simply decided to leave out names and all the details that may risk my personal well-being and that of those who were, like me, dragged into something they weren't ready for. Between the late 80s and the early 90s, I was what you may call a decision maker with one of the most established companies in the music industry. I came from Europe in the early 80s and quickly established myself in the business. The industry was different back then. Since technology and media weren't accessible to people like they are today, the industry had more control over the public and had the means to influence them any way it wanted. This may explain why in early 1991, I was invited to attend a closed door meeting with a small group of music business insiders to discuss rap music's new direction. Little did I know that we would be asked to participate in one of the most unethical and destructive business practices I have ever seen. The meeting was held at a private residence on the outskirts of Los Angeles. I remember about 25 to 30 people being there, most of them familiar faces. Speaking to those I knew, we joked about the theme of the meeting, as many of us did not care for rap music and failed to see the purpose of being invited to a private gathering to discuss its future. Among the attendees was a small group of unfamiliar faces who stayed to themselves and made no attempt to socialize beyond their circle. Based on their behavior and formal appearances, they didn't seem to be in our industry. Our casual chatter was interrupted when we were asked to sign a confidentiality agreement preventing us from publicly discussing the information presented during the meeting. Needless to say, this intrigued and in some cases disturbed many of us. The agreement was only a page long, but very clear on the matter and consequences, which stated that violating the terms would result in job termination. We asked several people what this meeting was about and the reason for such secrecy, but couldn't find anyone who had answers for us. A few people refused to sign and walked out. No one stopped them. I was tempted to follow, but curiosity got the best of me. A man who was part of the unfamiliar group collected the agreement from us. Quickly after the meeting began, one of my industry colleagues, who shall remain nameless like everyone else, thanked us for attending. He then gave the floor to a man who only introduced himself by first name and gave no further detail about his personal background. I think he was the owner of the residence, but it was never confirmed. He briefly praised us, all of us, for the success we had achieved in our industry and congratulated us for being selected as part of their small group of decision makers. At this point, I began to feel slightly uncomfortable at the strangeness of this gathering. The subject quickly changed as the speaker went on to tell us that the respective companies we represented had invested in a very profitable industry which could become even more rewarding with our active involvement. He explained that the companies we worked for had invested millions into the building of privately owned prisons, and that our positions of influence in the music industry would actually impact the profitability of these investments. I remember many of us in the group immediately looked at each other in confusion. At that time, I didn't know what a private prison was, but I wasn't the only one. Sure enough, someone asked what these prisons were and what any of us had to do with this. We were told that these prisons were built by privately owned companies who received funding from the government based on the number of inmates. The more inmates, the more money the government would pay these prisons. It was also made clear to us that since these prisons are privately owned, as they become publicly traded, we'd be able to buy shares. Most of us were taken back by this. Again, a couple of people asked what this had to do with us. At this point, my industry colleague, who had first opened the meeting, took the floor again and answered our question. He told us that since our employers had become silent investors in this prison business, it was now in their best interest to make sure that these prisons remained filled. Our job would be to help make this happen by marketing music which promotes criminal behavior, rap being the music of choice. He assured us that this would be a great situation for us because rap music was becoming an increasingly profitable market for our companies, and as employee, we'd also be able to buy personal stock in these prisons. Immediately, silence came over the room. You could have heard a pin drop. I remember looking around to make sure I wasn't dreaming and saw half of the people with dropped jaws. My daze was interrupted when someone shouted, "Is this a blanking joke?" At this point, things became chaotic. Two of the men who were part of the unfamiliar group grabbed the man who shouted out and attempted to remove him from the house. A few of us, myself included, tried to intervene. One of them pulled out a gun and we all backed off. They separated us from the crowd and all four of us were escorted outside. My industry colleague, who had opened the meeting earlier, hurried out to meet us and reminded us that we had signed agreement and would suffer the consequences of speaking out about this publicly or even with those who attended the meeting. I asked him why he was involved with something this corrupt, and he replied that it was bigger than the music business and nothing we'd want to challenge without risking consequences. We all protested, and as walked back into the house, I remember word for word the last thing he said. "It's out of my hands now. Remember, you signed an agreement." He then closed the door behind him. The men rushed us to our cars and actually watched until we drove off. A million things were going through my mind as I drove away, and I eventually decided to pull over and park on a side street in order to collect my thoughts. I replayed everything in my mind repeatedly, and it all seemed very surreal to me. I was angry with myself for not having taken a more active role in questioning what had been presented to us. I like to believe the shock of it all is what suspended my better nature. After what seemed like an eternity, I was able to calm myself enough to make it home. I didn't talk or call anyone that night. The next day, back at the office, I was visibly out of it, but blamed it on being under the weather. No one else in my department had been invited to the meeting, and I felt a sense of guilt for not being able to share what I'd witnessed. I thought about contacting the three others who were kicked out of the house, but I didn't remember their names and thought that tracking them down would probably bring unwanted attention. I considered speaking out publicly at the risk of losing my job, but I realized I'd probably be jeopardizing more than my job, and I wasn't willing to risk anything happening to my family. I thought about those men with guns and wondered who they were. I had been told that this was bigger than the music business, and all I could do was let my imagination run free. There were no answers, and to no one to talk to. I tried to do a little bit of research on private prisons, but didn't uncover anything about the music business involvement. However, the information I did find confirmed how dangerous this prison business really was. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Eventually, it was as if the meeting had never taken place. It all seemed surreal. I became more reclusive and stopped going to any industry events unless professionally obligated to do so. On two occasions, I found myself attending the same function as my former colleagues. Both times our eyes met, but nothing more was exchanged. As the months passed, rap music had definitely changed direction. I was never a fan of it, but even I could tell the difference. Rap acts that talked about politics or harmless fun were quickly fading away as gangster rap started dominating the airwaves. Only a few months had passed since the meeting, but I suspect that the ideas presented that day had been successfully implemented. It was as if the order had been given to all major label executives. The music was climbing the charts, and most companies were more than happy to capitalize on it. Each one was churning out their very own gangster rap acts on the assembly line. Everyone bought into it, consumers included. Violence and drugs use became a central theme in most rap music. I spoke to a few of my peers in the industry to get their opinion on the new trend, but was told repeatedly that it was all about supply and demand. Sadly, many of them even expressed that the music reinforced their prejudice of minorities. I officially quit the music business in 1993, but my heart had already left months before. I broke ties with the majority of my peers and removed myself from this thing I had once loved. I took some time off, returned to Europe for a few years, settled out of state, and lived in a quiet life away from the world of entertainment. As the years passed, I managed to keep my secret, fearful of sharing it with the wrong person, but also a little ashamed of not having had the balls to blow the whistle. But as rap got worse, my guilt grew. Fortunately, in the late 90s, having the internet as a resource, which wasn't at my disposal in the early days, made it easier for me to investigate what is now labeled the prison industrial complex. Now that I have a great understanding of how private prisons operate, things make much more sense than they ever have. I see how the criminalization of rap music played a big part in promoting racial stereotypes and misguided so many impressionable young minds into adopting these glorified criminal behaviors, which often lead to incarceration. 20 years of guilt is a heavy load to carry, but the least I could do now is to share my story, hoping that fans of rap music realize how they've been used for the past 2 decades. Although I plan on remaining anonymous for obvious reasons, my goal now is to get this information out to as many people as possible. Please help me spread the word. Hopefully, others who attend the meeting back in 1991 will be inspired by this and tell their own stories. Most importantly, if only one life has been touched by my story, I pray it makes the weight of my guilt a little more tolerable. Thank you. Now, these private prison cartels, slave masters, views individuals, as we see, not as souls of God's creation, but as just mere, products to profit on. The system was basically set up to, as you see, as the witness, manufacture an assembly line of behavioral products to be placed within their $1 trillion business infrastructure. What type of behavioral products? Thugs, gang members, criminals, pimps, prostitutes, drug addicts, drunkards, refurbished humans who have been targeted and pre-programmed with reckless, promiscuous, immoral, and mindless behavior through the gangster music. And we're going to see how this is a lot deeper than just the music and privatized prisons. Okay. So I've done, after I had received this information, I went and investigated even further. Okay, let me break it down how it works and how profits are made. Okay, okay. The two major prison companies are CCA, Corrections Corporations of America, and the GEO Group. The number one shareholder for CCA and GEO Group is the Vanguard Group, who holds shares in Viacom. Now, who is Viacom? Viacom owns, as you see, BET, MTV, Spike TV, Comedy Central, VT1, Paramount, all those, two made, and see, they are the two major catalysts for the gangster rap movement. Other shareholders are General Electric, which owns substantial shares in Universal, which owns major shares in Interscope Records, which is Suge Knight's, Death Row Records. Is also Russell Simmons. Remember Def Jam? The CEO of Def Jam, a major catalyst and pioneer in the gangster and thug movement. Okay? So private prisons earn, private prisons earn $122 per day from the federal government per inmate on average. Probably went up by now. Along with huge commissions they earn from the pharmaceutical companies that they also tie into. So they haven't just tied into the music companies, but also the pharmaceutical companies. We're going to go deeper in that later. But don't be mistaken, the thug movement is not just capsulated, like I said, within the rap industry, but in the 90s, these private prison cartel discovered that the thug mentality movement could also be transferable into R&B. Okay, so we started seeing also in the 90s, like groups like Jodeci and all that, they kind of put on a more gangster image, and we see that's the common trend now. The pop, the rock music, punk music, and more. And also cleverly has inserted, like I said, this whole mentality into the movies, television, and video games, which we're going to talk about a little later, which as we see has gone mainstream. Okay, so in the pharmaceutical industry, the private prison cartel portfolio of companies includes the McKesson Corporation, Vertez Pharmaceuticals, Astellas Pharmaceuticals, and Rexon Pharmaceuticals, so on. The list goes on. You got to believe that these individuals, they're not only profiting off of the privatized prisons, okay? They're not just profiting off the private, but also they're holding contracts, because you have to understand, we got Vanguard and BlackRock. They own huge shares, in the pharmaceutical companies. They own huge shares in the video game industry. So, like I said, when these individuals go into the prison system, okay, they bought into the shares for the pharmaceuticals. And a lot of times they're using the entertainment because, like I said, a lot of the entertainment, which we're going to talk about a little later, is promoting drug use. So a lot of individuals that are on drugs, when they come to the prison, there's no drugs there. They get on pharmaceuticals. And who's there? Who's profiting from that? Vanguard and BlackRock, okay? And I'm not saying, like I said, I just want to make it clear. I'm not saying all pharmaceuticals are bad and everybody that works for these companies are bad people. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I'm trying to give you the big picture how this whole thing works, okay? Now that some of the people, the shot callers on top, they know what they're doing, okay? But some people are just employed and, working for these companies, so I'm not trying to demonize them. Okay. Now, as a former correctional counselor for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, I know firsthand that medicating inmates is big business. Again, the pharmaceutical industry is a $1 trillion business. Okay. Unfortunately, I witnessed too many psychiatrists, not all, some desiring to begin medicating before educating. And so instead of, teaching them practical coping methods and life skills, they just medicate them. Bottom line, medicating is a lot more profitable. Okay, so they have, so this prison cartel, private prison cartel, they have strategically set up basically a win-win financial cycle for themselves, which we're about to go into, which not only creates massive wealth in each module cycle, but furthers basically the New World Order. We don't have time to get into that. The Antichrist New World Order agenda at the same time. It's simple. The Masonic or Illuminati strategy, which is one of the same, is to create, and this is their theme, order out of chaos. I'm going to cover this on another video that's going to be coming soon. Now, like I said, this is their little model. So you see, to create money in the privatized prison system, you have to create crime. Let me explain this as simple as I can. Okay, this private prison cartel has basically 6 modules. Okay, 6 modules. I'm kind of just showing you. Oh, also, let me just show you real quick before we go there. We see McDonald's has jumped into the game, and not only McDonald's, but Walmart has basically jumped into the game also. Ain't that interesting? Okay. But anyway, like I said, they created 6 financial modules within this privatized prison. But let's first expose, like I said, the 2 major players. Again, 2 major players again is the trying to get, excuse me, let me get, there we go. Are these individuals, okay? Is the Vanguard and BlackRock investment companies, and they have invested major shares into the 2 primary privatized prisons companies, which are, like we said, the GEO Group and the CCA Group. They have prisons in the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and South Africa. Okay, so this is going international. And the GEO Group, as you see, has 106 facilities international. And the CCA Group is mainly in the United States. Is only in the United States. They have 67 facilities. Now, the Vanguard Group and BlackRock Incorporated have also spread out their tentacles, if you will, and invested major shares into 5 other sectors of the business market, which have been very successful at generating crime to generate criminals for their privatized prisons by cultivating criminal mindsets, by glorifying immoral and criminal lifestyles through entertainment. So I'll now explain how these 6 modules work cohesively together in harmony, bringing in massive residual profits. Okay, so we see here, 2.3 million people incarcerated in the U.S. Prisons are big business, and as we see, the McDonald's has jumped into it. And but let's go over here to module 1. Okay, and module 1 is basically entertainment. Okay, that's what they've invested in. We talked about they invested into companies like Viacom, which owns numerous entertainment outlets. I mean, they invested a whole bunch more too. Universal. I mean, I don't have time to put all that up. All the graphs of everything they invest in. I mean, this is public knowledge. You can investigate it yourself. They create the music and the culture which glorifies thugs, gang members, pimps, strippers, gambling, etc. And let me just clarify, I'm not saying that we blame everything on these companies, because, individuals, we have our own free will, what we choose to allow ourselves to be influenced by. But what I'm just saying is they are, like I said, as you've seen, targeting the youth to get them into prison to make their profits. Okay. Now, and they understand the reason why they went with entertainment. Why would they go with music? Now, if you watch some of my other videos, The Powerful Influence of Music, which I'll leave, if you're watching it on YouTube, I'm going to leave a link in my description box. Okay. We understand that there's been some research by Dr. Roy H. Williams, who wrote the book Thought Particles. And basically, he's present the brain in 2 parts. We have our left brain and we have our right brain. And what they say is, your left brain is what you're listening to me with right now. Okay, that's your conscious state. and your right brain is picking up all the background sounds. Your right brain is like a 24-hour audio and video recorder. I mean, they say you never forget anything. You say, yes, I do. They say, no, you don't. Your left brain forgets it. Okay, that's why people, when they're in a situation, traumatic situation, or about to die, they believe, and their whole life flashes before their eyes. That's because everything in that right brain is released, from your subconscious, and it goes up, back to the left brain. But what they say is, as I'm talking to you right now, and you're listening to me with your left brain, you can basically kind of maybe discard things that I'm saying to you. Why? Because, there's no music or beat to it. But they say if I put a nice beat or a nice rhythm that you like, you could say, well, I'm not really hearing what Ray's saying, but I do like the beat and the rhythm he's playing. That's all I need. As long as you're connected to that beat and rhythm, they say the words that I speak will bypass your left brain over here and go over to your right brain. And people say, well, big deal. It's in my right brain. That's your subconscious mind. What they say is what's in your right brain during your sleep cycle will transfer back to your left brain. You begin to believe and understand these words and not even knowing you believe and understand it. Okay? So let me just show you just a real quick, see if I have this thing set up here. Here we go. Okay, this is a little animation that I put together. Okay, so this is an individual that's going to be, this is an animation I did, just showing how, based on Dr. H. Williams, here's an individual just listening to the music. Okay, he's just listening to it maybe just for the beat. People say, I just listen to music just for the beat, but encapsulated within the lyrics are messages. There's beliefs, okay, like messages of anger and lust, messages of pride and violence, okay? Messages of anarchy, greed, drugs, rebellion. So he's just listening to it, he's just grooving to it, okay? So what this happened is that these messages are bypassing his left brain and going to his right brain, the subconscious that he's not aware of. Okay, a lot of people say your subconscious is your spirit. Okay, they've said that in different cultures. So now what's in the right brain? Now what's happening is now during the sleep cycle, okay, as this individual is sleeping, you're going to see what's in his right brain gets transferred back to his left brain. Okay? Ain't that interesting? And he starts believing and understanding the messages, not even knowing he's believing and understanding it. So think about the message out there. I'm a gangster, I'm a pimp, and all these from the right brain going to the left brain, and your mind is still working even in your sleep. So now he's waking up. He got all these negative messages. He's waking up angry. He's making up mad. He got an attitude and everything else. Okay. But let me just show you just some of what's going on right now with, targeted to young girls.